Hello again and welcome back for some more English. Did you hear Peter say to Sharon, if I were rich and famous, I would send along my private jet so she could visit him at weekends? If I were rich and famous, I would send along my private jet. Well, that's a bit improbable, isn't it? But it's useful for us because it means that we can learn another grammatical form because he was using the second conditional. Remember in another lesson we learnt the first conditional. This one is the second conditional. So, if I were rich and famous, I'd send along. Now, this is unusual because you say to yourself, wait a minute, if I were, that's not right, because I taught you, I was, you were, he, she, it was, we were, you were, they were. How can you say if I were? Well, it's a special grammatical form. It's a subjunctive form, probably the only subjunctive form left in English. And when you say, if I were you, you're putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, okay? He says, if I were rich and famous. He uses the verb to be, and this is where the subjunctive comes into play, all right? So very unusual. You must have probably heard this expression, if I were you. If I were you, I would do this. And I want to give you some examples of that because it's very common in English. If I say to you, for example, I'm tired, you could answer, if I were you, I'd go to bed. Now, if I were you, that's the past form, followed by I would go to bed. That's the conditional form, conditional to. If I were you, I would go to bed. Another example, smoking, yeah? I say, look, I can't stop smoking. I want to stop smoking, but I can't. You could say to me, well, if I were you, I'd go to a hypnotist, for example. One possibility, why not? If I were you, I would. Another example, imagine that I am bitten. Look, Mr. Snake bites me. I've been bitten by a snake. I've been bitten by a snake. You could say to me, well, if I were you, I would suck your blood out. Or, if I were you, I would go immediately to a doctor. So do you see how this works? If I were you, I would. Let's go to the screen now because I want to show you that example and also normal examples of the second conditional. So, we use the second conditional when something is improbable. That's why we use if. Let's look at some normal examples. We have if plus the simple past and then would and the infinitive. So a typical example is, if I won the lottery, win 1-1, I'd buy a house. Yeah. If I won the lottery, I'd buy a house. I would buy a house. It's improbable, but if he didn't smoke, negative, past, negative, he wouldn't need an operation. You see, if plus the simple past in the negative and then would in the negative. If you ate less, you would lose more weight. If you ate less, you'd lose more weight. All right, so those are normal examples of the hypothetical situations of the second conditional. And now let's get back to the example I did with you. If I were rich and famous, remember that? If I were. In the episode, it was if he were rich and famous, he'd send an airplane to Sharon. Okay? If I were you, I would forget Jack. If I were you, I would forget Jack. If I were you, I would continue studying with me and English today, if I were you. All right, so that's the second conditional for you. There are 3. We've studied number 1, we've studied number 2, and later on we'll see number 3 too. Okay? So goodbye for now. Bye.